So Ted, you have Fuse coming out in like 2 or 3 weeks.
May 28th.
May 28th.
Yeah.
So what is it that, like, as soon as I play this game, what is going to jump out and be like, oh, this is clearly an Insomniac game?
I think the first thing people will point to is the weapons. Even though we have a big story, we have 4 unique characters in the game and a lot of really cool co-op features, Insomniac's DNA is very apparent with the Fuse-powered weapons, the Xenotech. And you pick these weapons up at the very beginning of the game, and each one is very different in its functionality. And what they do is they confer a specific archetype onto each of the 4 characters. And we spent a lot of time prototyping, experimenting, brainstorming, failing on these weapons until we got them right. And that took a long time because instead of going broad and giving you 20 different exotic weapons, we really wanted to go deep and give you 4 that could be upgradable, that had multiple functions, and as I said before, created these archetypes for each of the 4 characters.
Okay, so I mean, you started this weapon trend, the crazy weapons with Ratchet and Clank, and you continued it with Resistance. What is going to be different about the way you approach weapons in Fuse?
I think the most obvious difference is that these weapons are built to be combined. When we decided to make the game a 4-person co-op game, which could be played by 1 person, 2 persons, 3 people, or 4, we knew that we would have to make sure the weapons could be strategically combined in a way that hadn't been seen before. And that was what took so much experimentation, because it's a jigsaw puzzle. We didn't want to give 4 players the exact same weapon. I mean, traditionally in co-op, I think people expect to have a variation of a machine gun.
Yeah.
And co-op is pointing those machine guns at one enemy and taking them down. And we knew that would be the most straightforward and expected way to progress with Fuse, but we also knew that if we wanted to raise the bar for co-op, we had to rethink how these weapons could be used in combat by 4 players who had different approaches to combat and different desires for playing a role. So an example is Dalton, who has the mag shield, and the mag shield is a result of combining Fuse, this alien substance, and ferrofluid, and it creates this big shield that Dalton can carry around, and what it does is it absorbs incoming projectiles and converts them to kinetic energy, but his teammates can also fire through the shield, so he's a really useful tank.
Okay.
Especially when there's no cover, or you're in a corridor with enemies coming towards you, or on a bridge where you're totally exposed. And when his teammates shoot weapons, Fuse-powered weapons or regular weapons through the mag shield, it creates a very simple combo. And both Dalton gets points, experience points, and his teammates get experience points for achieving kills through the mag shield. Again, very simple example. We get super complex in terms of how all these weapons can be combined. They're close to 60 different combinations you can pull off. We call them out in the game with big labels that appear on the screen, and there are experience points popping up, which help you progress through the progression system.
So other shooters like Gears of War, Halo, when they have co-op, it's basically you get another gun.
Yeah.
And then there's games like Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, where it's a real co-op game where you have to work cooperatively every second to progress. Where do you strike your balance with how co-op works?
Well, we definitely don't force co-op down anybody's throat. I mean, this is not a game where you have to play as a specific character to get past a point in the game. What we do is we encourage co-op by this point system I was talking about. We have a deep progression system that runs through both the story-driven campaign and our Echelon competitive mode. And the more experience points you earn, the more you level up, and the more cool abilities you can unlock in each of the 4 skill trees that these characters have. But you get more points if you are combining your weapons. And I'll give you another example. Izzy has a shatter gun, and what it does at the beginning of the game is crystallize enemies. And the reason it does that is because thematically, we take Fuse, this alien substance, and we combine it with black melanite, which is an exotic crystal actually found on Earth. And what this does when fired at an enemy is it creates a black crystalline statue. And it pulls enemies up out of cover, which in itself is a co-op mechanic, in that you're setting up these enemies like bowling pins for your teammates who can shatter them. But what's really fun is when you start using other abilities to take down these crystallized enemies. For example, Naya has a warp rifle, which creates these chaining black holes. So I can chain a whole bunch of enemies, which go pop, 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 big black hole, big expanding ring of destruction, which then shatter my crystallized enemies, which gives both Naya and me, if I'm playing Izzy, a lot of points. Or I can be firing the warp rifle through the mag shield while remaining protected, which creates a warp chain, then shattering these crystallized enemies, which gives 3 people points.
Okay.
And you can go up to 4 people combining their weapons in different ways. But when you're in these heavy combat situations, the enemies are tough, and they're moving fast, they're trying to flank you, they're smart, and they're keeping you pinned down. So you really do have to think about what role you are playing in this group of 4. Am I the crowd control expert with my shatter gun? Am I the tank? Am I the area of effect specialist? Am I the distant damage dealer? Or am I the trap expert? These are all roles that each of these characters can play, including healer and flanker. So all these roles are conferred by the various abilities you can unlock with each of these weapons.
Okay. I mean, I think you guys have only done 3 co-op games before, Deadlocked, and then Resistance 2 and 3.
All for one.
All for one, also, yeah. Obviously, I missed that one. But it seems like this is kind of like Resistance 2, and that it has like the different roles.
Yeah.
And you kind of, but it's not like a designated role necessarily, but it's like the different roles that you fall into, almost like an MMO style.
Exactly. I mean, we drew a lot from MMOs and RPGs in general in trying to create archetypes that were not strict, right? Dalton is your tank because he has a mag shield, but he can pick up tons of other shooter favorites in the game and be very effective with the burst rifle or the sniper rifle or an assault rifle, dragonfly pistol, rocket launcher, minigun, flamethrower. And there are a lot of things that you can actually use, but he really does shine when he uses and it becomes unique when he uses the mag shield. Same with the other 3 characters and their fuse-powered weapons.
Okay, so it's interesting this is co-op because the trend this generation, and it was being mocked for a while, is like, let's put in multiplayer. And you just had tons and tons of games like Dark Sector and the newest Tomb Raider that are really good games that just have this tossed in multiplayer mode, but there's not a lot of co-op. The co-op is usually of the Halo, like, hey, there's another gun style, and really there's Borderlands, and that's about it for like a co-op game built for co-op. This is co-op. Like, why is that such a rare thing in this industry? Why is co-op not everywhere?
So I think it's hard to do. I think it's hard to make co-op meaningful and to give players something that they haven't seen before in co-op. And as I said before, and traditionally co-op has been you have 2 clones, right? You have 2 of the same character, basically outfitted the same way, doing the same thing. And because with Fuse, from the very beginning, we wanted to raise the bar for co-op and especially make it really fun for 2, 3, 4 players. We knew that we had to change the rules a bit in terms of expectations that players would have. But back to why there hasn't been much co-op, it's a hard question to answer. I feel it actually goes against a growing trend in our industry, which is that games are becoming more social.
Yeah, exactly.
And gamers are becoming more connected. And it's not just on consoles, it's on PC, it's on mobile, it's everywhere.
Yeah, you did a Facebook game that kind of tapped into this, Outernauts.
Yeah, Outernauts is huge in terms of its collaborative properties. And really, it's fun to work with friends and help them, or have them help you to achieve loftier goals within the game. That's the kind of satisfaction that I know we at Insomniac derive from having team-based play. It's fun to face a difficult challenge and not just approach it in a brute force fashion, but collaborate in terms of coming up with strategies that involve each player's archetype and get creative. And when you overcome that particular challenge, it feels really good because there are 4 of you doing it, and you hopefully, you're giving yourselves a virtual high five. Something else I think that has also not been very prevalent this generation is couch co-op.
Definitely.
That was something we saw a lot on PlayStation 2 and Xbox, but since that generation, it's kind of died off. And it's been fun traveling around the world and showing Fuse off to people and having them notice that, hey, you guys have couch co-op. I can play locally with a friend? Oh, and not only that, I can actually save my progress? That's something else that has sort of disappeared, is that the second player in a couch co-op game traditionally has been an anonymous player, and so haven't been able to log in with your own ID. With Fuse, you can actually log in and with your own user and track your stats with your buddy who's also tracking his stats, so that when you decide to play solo, or if you go off and play an online game with several other people, your progress has been saved. The other thing you can do too, and I'm getting into sort of the feature list here, but I'm excited about it because I love doing it, is you can play couch co-op against people online. So, for example, if you and I wanted to play couch co-op against 2 of our friends who are also playing couch co-op online, we can do it. Or I shouldn't say against, with, because it's a cooperative game. And again, that is something that we found people are really responding well to, just because it doesn't exist. Now, for me, I have a big family, right? And something that we as a family like to do is we love to play co-op games, and I kind of bemoan the dearth of especially couch co-op games, and for us, it's fun to bring that back.
Yeah, so I mean, you've worked with major publishers, Sony for years. Now you're working with EA. You probably have talked to others. Have you ever noticed like a reticence to embrace co-op from them, and like willingness to? Because it really doesn't make sense to me. Like trying to figure out like why isn't this everywhere? Why is Borderlands such an anomaly in this game space?
Well, I think that it may have a lot to do with the focus on story, right? It's a big challenge in a cooperative game to tell a coherent story that is pertinent to all of the characters in the game. And we knew that going into Fuse, so we spent a lot of time developing backstory for each of the 4 characters and figuring out ways that we could tell that backstory and the main story in the game without slowing it down. I know that when we play a single-player game, and we expect big bombastic cinematics, maybe every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but you can't really do that practically in a cooperative game when you have 3 other players going, come on man, let's go, move it. So we had to come up with ways to get the story out through emergent dialogue and real-time storytelling. Now we do have cinematics in the game for big story points, and our story has plenty of twists and turns, but it was an adventure for us to figure that out. And I do think that holds a lot of people back from really diving in to co-op in a big way.
Okay, so one of recent release, Monaco, What's Yours Is Mine, just came out, and it's an indie game, and it's all about like it's a stealth theft game, basically a heist game, and it's really good in single player, but it's designed for co-op, and it sounds kind of like Fuse in that it's you can play through it by yourself and you'll have a lot of fun, but it's just best when you have 3 buddies, all with unique roles. But I've been noticing, just reading comments and people reacting to it, is like you're kind of forced into that. If I want to get the most out of it, I need to get 3 of my buddies to buy it also.
For Monaco.
For Monaco.
Right.
Like, do you feel like, even though Fuse is going to be totally fun alone, that people are going to have that, like, with Borderlands, like, I really need to get 3 people to buy this? Do you think they're going to have that kind of barrier of entry kind of weighing them down when they...
I don't think it's going to, if there is that barrier, I don't think it's because of the game. And that maybe sounds egotistic from an Insomniac perspective, but we did put a lot of time into the bots. And that was important to us from the start. We had Jan Mueller, one of our programmers, dedicated to it for the entire production period, which was a long time. And what we wanted to ensure was that your bots behave the way that you want them to. And it sounds ambiguous, but the point is you don't want them to kill steal. You don't want them to, in other words, you walk into a combat setup, you don't want your bots to go wipe everybody out and leave you going, what? What am I supposed to be doing? You want the bots to support you in your aims within the game, and you want them to behave intelligently with the skills you've unlocked. One of the things I really like to do in the game is leap back and forth between the 4 characters, which is another big feature, and unlock some of their secondary skills. One of them is Izzy's healing beacon. She has a shatter gun, and because the shatter gun is based off of Fuse and Black Melanite, Fuse also converts some of the crystal to these beacons you can throw out. And when you do that, you can heal people from across the battlefield. And that's important, because if a person on the team wipes, the whole team goes down. So when you're bleeding out, she can throw a healing crystal, you can crawl into its vicinity, or she can hopefully accurately place it, and then you revive. Now it's really fun to watch your bots doing that, because your bots will use abilities like that to get you out of trouble, and that really is their prime directive. Get me out of trouble if I'm in trouble. Now if I do something really stupid, the bots may have trouble actually getting to me, but that's an important aspect of feeling good about the AI in the game. And the other thing that we want them to do is make sure they're just not getting in your way, right? When you play games with bots, and the bots will get in your way, and you're just, come on, move out of the way so I can shoot. So we spend a lot of time making sure that they really are helpful, just in all ways. And in the game, since you can play with 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, or 4 humans, whenever you're playing with up to 4 people, you've always got a bot in the game. So it's really important, no matter even beyond solo playing, that the bots are well behaved for cooperative play.
Okay. So you're an EA Partners game on EA's Partners label. They recently announced that they're shutting down that program, so I think you might be the last. I'm not sure if there's anything else planned. And like previous games that came out, Shadows of the Damned and Alice Madness Returns they're two of my favorite games, because they're excellent, and they bombed horribly. And it's like when I heard that you guys are EA Partners, I was terrified. That was my first reaction, is like, oh crap, they're sent to die. Because that's kind of what happens with EA Partners games. Like, how are you going to shut this trend of like, hey, we got a great game, notice us, buy us?
Well, the number one thing that we're doing is putting out a playable demo.
That came out May 7th, right?
Today, yeah. Playable demo on PSN and XBLA, and we want people who have any questions about the game to download it and play it. Play it with your friends, play it by yourself. I mean, there's a lot in the demo in terms of how much you can upgrade your characters. We've got a lot of things unlocked, so you can check out their weapons and some of the upgradability of the weapons and the characters. Certainly, we want people to try leaping, which is the feature in the game where you can instantly transfer between all four of the characters. And this is something you don't see in a lot of multi-character games today. If you think about the last RPG or the last first-person shooter or third-person shooter you played, if you had a choice of characters at the beginning, you made your choice and you probably got locked in. And if you wanted to change your character, you got to go back and start the story over again. We wanted to throw that out the window with Fuse, and we argued a lot about it. But when we actually got it in the game and started playing with it, it made a lot of sense, because all four of these characters are so different, and they have and it's fun in combat to experiment with their different abilities. Moreover, and for me, as somebody who likes RPGs, it's really fun to leap back and forth between those four characters and start building up their skill trees, unlocking different abilities as I earn experience points. And because each of those four characters has his or her own experience point pool, you really do need to leap back and forth, because you can't just play one character and I've earned 50,000 experience points and now I can apply them across all four. You need to jump back and forth between them. Now, pundits and critics will say that, well, if I play Dalton all the way through the game, my other characters are going to suck by the end, so why would I leap? During the game, there are objectives that you will accomplish, there are experience point boosts that you find, and those benefit all four characters. And so we're always building up the other characters slightly, so that you don't end up having to start from scratch if you're one of those people who just likes to play Naya all the way through.
Okay. So this is your first multi-platform game, right?
Correct.
Okay, so like one of the benefits of multi-platform is like, hey, you instantly double the amount of people who can see this, because now it's on Xbox and PlayStation. But like one of the detriments is that when there's a PlayStation exclusive or Xbox exclusive, everybody's like, oh wow, we have to pay attention to Too Human, or we have to pay attention to Lair. Like even games that aren't good get like that exclusive recognition. Like where's the balance of this? Is this like a good decision ultimately to go alone and to...
I'm proud of Fuse. I think it's a great game, and I think that no matter what platform you're on, PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360, you're going to love it. So I don't think there's that same worry that you had about Lair or other games.
Well, I think it's going to turn out like much better than Lair. I don't want to compare it to that, but it's just like there's that automatic bump of when a game is exclusive.
Well, I think
that people just notice it, and people are like, oh, there's a Gears of War coming, and it might not get that love if it was on every platform.
Well, those games are also published by first parties, so
yeah.
You're right. Those first party games are usually associated with the console. For us, the way we look at it is we are speaking to a much larger audience with both PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 fans. And over the years, we've had Xbox 360 fans ask, why aren't you guys making games for us? And bring an Insomniac game with your cool weapons and your characters and your stories and your crazy worlds to us. And so that's what we've done. And I hope that Xbox 360 fans enjoy what is really our first experience outside of the PlayStation.
Yeah, I guess there's always...
I should say our second, because we had Outernauts. We have had Outernauts, and we're bringing that to mobile, which is exciting for us too.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of our first console experience off of Sony platforms, Fuse is the first one for us, so I can't wait to see what people say.
Yeah. One of my favorite developers is Rare, and they thrived on Nintendo platforms. They were partially owned by Nintendo for years, and Super Nintendo, N64, and even early the GameCube. They were like Nintendo's right-hand man. And then they go to Microsoft, and it's a different audience, and all of a sudden all of their games bomb, even though their quality didn't go down at all. Banjo was nuts and bolts was just as good as the previous ones. Like, is there that fear that all of a sudden the people who supported you before, they're not there on Microsoft system almost. Is that a fear at all?
I think the gaming world has changed. I think that over this generation, and in fact in the last 2 years in particular, the gaming audience has just exploded in terms of its breadth and its acceptance of different platforms in general. And I think I certainly hope there's a little bit less of the it's PlayStation 3 or else, or it's Xbox 360 or else, and any game that doesn't appear on these platforms I hate. I think there's much more acceptance that great games appear on all platforms, and it doesn't really matter what platform you're on as long as you can have an awesome experience, right? I mean, certainly it matters to a lot of people. If I own a PlayStation 3 and that's all I own, I'm going to be buying PlayStation 3 games, clearly. So those loyalists will always exist, and certainly what we have tried to do is tell our PlayStation 3 fans, hey, we are making a huge effort to make sure that there is parity between both the PS3 and Xbox 360 games, and there is. I mean, these games are the same. We didn't put more effort into one, we put a lot of effort into both. And I'm excited for both our PlayStation 3 fans and for hopefully new Xbox 360 fans who see an Insomniac game on their platform.
Do you notice, because now you have to look at what kind of people play both of those systems. Is there an entire overlap, or is there like 360 owners prefer this slightly more than PlayStation owners?
That's a good question. I actually don't know. I mean, I know that I play both. And I play all types of games on both platforms. I play the smaller indie games, I play big AAA console games, and everything in between. And for me, it's a blast because I can jump back and forth between platforms, and I can enjoy platform exclusives. But at the same time, I can also enjoy a game that exists on both platforms. It just depends on what I want to play that night. So
one system that does seem to have, the audience has different tastes, is Nintendo systems usually. And you're not on the Wii U.
Correct.
Why are you not on that system?
Well, first of all, we bit off a lot with Fuse. Brand new IP, right? Building a brand new IP is a massive challenge, and I think that's one of the reasons you don't see a lot of new console IP. Today we are in a period where mostly we're seeing sequels, right? And so for us it's exciting and a little terrifying to be a brand new IP out at this time, because we're waving the flag and saying, oh, you actually can release new content. And you know what? We're hearing from gamers that they want something different. They want something more than a sequel. But at any point, whether it's the beginning of a console life cycle, middle, or the end, building a new world is challenging because you never know how things are going to evolve as you experiment and figure out what works for the game. At the same time, we built a brand new engine and tool set for the game so that we could decrease iteration time, increase the time we had to experiment within the game and improve things overall in terms of our own production, and of course support a brand new platform. And then we're working with a new partner as well. So a lot of new stuff, which meant that we had to be very careful not to overextend ourselves and just put out the best possible game we could for these two consoles.
Is it just a financial issue why it's not on the PC or the Wii U, or was there more to it than just pure, we don't have the money right now to do that?
It's a bandwidth issue. It's a time issue. It's actually having the people to, if you want to talk about PC, when you put out a game for PC, there's a lot that goes into it, right? There's compatibility testing and making sure that you actually support all of the viable combinations of CPUs and GPUs out there. Making sure that your mouse and keyboard support really rocks, right? Making sure that your distribution systems work for whatever you've chosen on PC. Lots and lots of considerations. And again, our focus was on, let's make sure that what we're delivering is an awesome experience and not spread ourselves so thin that we deliver on a ton of platforms and it's all kind of, okay.
So if this does hit big, do you see yourself possibly porting it to the PC or in the Wii U, or do you think that like once you're done, you're gonna maybe have DLC and just move on to something else?
Well, whenever we build a new IP, our goal is to create a franchise. A long-lived franchise. And where we take that franchise is anybody's guess. We have big plans for Fuse, and we own the intellectual property for it, so we have a lot of options.
Okay, so is that the most important reason why you branched away from Sony with this, to own your own property finally, or was there? There
were two reasons. I mean, that was one of them. EA Partners works with companies who own their own intellectual property, and they're one of the few publishers out there who do. And it's a multi-platform game. As I said, we wanted to reach a broader audience, and make a game for the Xbox 360 players as well as PlayStation 3 players. And clearly Sony does not publish Xbox 360 games. So EAP was a great choice for those reasons.
Yeah. So you guys have been independent for forever, and I think Sony tried to purchase you at some point. I think most people kind of assumed you were owned by Sony for a while.
I think it's funny. I mean, well, it makes sense because we've worked with them for so long, and I gotta say, Sony's a great partner.
Okay.
I mean, we really have enjoyed working together for a long time, and we've been through a lot together, and they have helped us do what we do, which is create worlds, crazy weapons, and bring games like Ratchet and Clank, Spyro, Resistance to legions of PlayStation fans out there.
Okay. So, I mean, we saw Sony recently did purchase Sucker Punch, who is another very similar position as you. They do the Sly Cooper franchise. Why was it so important for you to remain anonymous or independent? Not anonymous.
We don't want to be anonymous.
Opposite, independent.
It's been something that's important to all of us at Insomniac in terms of having choices, making our own way in an industry that is definitely fluid. More and more fluid. And so being flexible and having the opportunity to move in different directions to reflect where the industry is going and where fans are going is incredibly important. So being independent means that we do have that flexibility to work with different partners, to move on to different platforms, to build new IP when we want to build new IP.
So what is the scariest prospect going forward as a completely independent publisher in this kind of game, or developer in this game space?
It's being able to predict the future. I don't think that it's a problem that is unique to independent developers. I think everybody in this industry is wondering what's going to happen next. What's going to happen with the next gen consoles? What's going to happen with mobile? What's going to happen to the existing audience for current gen consoles and PC? What do people want to play? Yeah. I mean, there's so many big questions right now, and it reflects how fast technology in our world in general is moving, and games tend to be on the cutting edge of technology in terms of the kind of things we do in games. Even though consoles themselves may be static in terms of the tech within consoles, PC games, mobile games continue to innovate in terms of how they address audience and how distribution is performed and how monetization occurs in games. That's really exciting, and it's also really risky at the same time because you make too many wrong moves and what do you got left? So for us, it's like being on a roller coaster ride, and an exciting one. And I look ahead and I get excited about just more and more opportunity for content creators because our audience is expanding thanks to mobile, right? Just more and more people are playing games today. They may not all be jumping onto the latest AAA blockbuster console game, but they're getting exposed to games in a way they weren't 3-4 years ago, which is fantastic. So that means that all of us get to tell our stories who are in the development field and reach more and more people who will hopefully appreciate the kind of things that we create.
Yeah. So it seems like the industry now is just like clearly separated into many different places. Like there's,
I don't think it's clearly separated. I think there's a ton of crossover. I'll use Insomniac as an example. We make console games, but we also are now moving into the mobile space, right? And so occupying both of those spaces, and hell, we've been in social space with the Outernauts, the Facebook game. So I think there's going to be more and more crossover. And it's not just us as an independent developer and our peers out there who are independent developers, but it's publishers as well. Have made major forays into, call it non-traditional gaming spaces.
Okay.
And that, again, reflects how fast our market is changing.
Yeah, well, I guess what I was trying to say is something like what succeeds in the different spaces seems to be different. Mobile, to generalize, mobile, it's kind of like you can pick it up for 5 minutes and have a blast with it, but there's a lot more deeper content if you want to keep playing. But it needs to be enjoyable for a train ride. Whereas the indie scene kind of like, if it's new, and like that's kind of what people want. Like Monaco is way different than anything else, and people flock to that. The AAA scene is way different, and you guys are in the AAA scene. So what do you think you need to do in that space to stand out? What is the similarities between the Halos and the Assassin's Creed and these other huge games?
I think that making sure you deliver what is, say, demanded from a AAA game, like great story, great characters, great settings, but then innovating in some way. Like picking something and doing it better than anybody else is absolutely key. And for us, it's been co-op. For Fuse in particular, making sure that what we do with Leap in the game, with the weapons, with the unified progression system between the two modes in the game, those things actually elevate Fuse above its brethren. So that helps games in the AAA space stand out. It has to do something that people can point to and say, yeah, that game does this thing really well, or maybe does several things really well. It's tough if you can't hang your hat on something in that space. You're right, with the smaller games, you can do, you don't have to have all that sort of the backstop of a great story and great visuals and all those things that are expected from a console game. You can be a game that is very, call it low tech in terms of its visuals, but do something great. And I'll give you a great example. Yesterday, thanks to Lisa, one of our designers, I started playing Candies, this ASCII-based game, which is just a website, and you're picking up candies. It's like every second you're getting candy.
Wait, what?
And you're
it's an ASCII game?
It's an ASCII game, and you see there's ASCII art and just a few buttons that you can press, and you are earning candy every second, and you start using that candy to buy stuff, swords, armor, and you go on these little quests, these little ASCII quests. And it totally took me back to my childhood when I was playing Apple II games. I mean, it's even more primitive than the games I was playing on Apple II, but it is a game that does something extremely well, and it totally throws out the graphics, it throws out any kind of story or characterization, and just engages you through this one mechanic. And there are lots and lots of other examples of indie games out there that do this, or mobile games, or dare I say Minecraft. Like Minecraft throws visuals out the window for the most part, but allows you to do something that is truly innovative in terms of being able to build anything, create your own world. So, to me, these examples are what inspire those of us who are in the console space as well, and remind us that we do have to continue to innovate and do something special with our games.
Yeah, I love that you say that. I don't know if I see that in the MPD retail charts, because it seems like people kind of flock to more of the same. I mean, the last Call of Duty did go in slightly different directions, but Call of Duty kind of does what it does really well, but it does what it does.
I know.
And Assassin's Creed is a similar thing, and there's a lot of franchises like that. So you think...
Well, okay, before you ask your question, let me say that I do think there's a tension between sales and the creative urge, because a lot of us who are in the game space, no matter whether we're on consoles or PC or mobile, want to build something that excites people and excites us, right? Mm-hmm. And what we build doesn't always sell well, right? But we had this urge to tell these stories, to get out there with our creations, and sometimes it works. Sometimes it does. It goes through the roof. Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't. And a great example for me on consoles, Journey. Journey took some incredible creative risks.
Oh yeah.
Did it sell that well? I don't know yet. I mean, I don't think you can't compare it to a Call of Duty, right? And it may never have that reach because it has such a special flavor that your average Call of Duty player probably won't appreciate Journey as much. But the fact that those games exist and can exist in our industry is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that gamers recognize those games and appreciate what they bring to the table is what keeps all of us, I think a lot of us, motivated and continuing to think ahead to what it is that we want to build next.
Yeah. Well, I guess the difference with Journey, though, is that it's not as expensive as Call of Duty. They don't have to sell as many units to recoup it. The same thing. I mean, Assassin's Creed has 400 to 600 people working on it, so there's not as much risk. Basically, they could do something and experiment, and then it's not going to bomb and kill the company as easily. So, as someone who makes AAA games, how scary is it to try to innovate, knowing that one false step equals that's it?
Well, we work on a lot of games, so I mean, we definitely try to spread out the risk as well. We don't put all of our eggs in one basket. But I think regardless of the size of the budget, there is always that drive and that need to innovate. You have to do it, and I know when we made our tone. I'll bring this up. When we made our tone shift from Overstrike to Fuse, we had a lot of people going, "What? You guys look like you're becoming more of a traditional shooter than what you had," and that I understand that reaction, but what we were doing was continuing to evolve the game and focus on the core fun factor and make sure that we were really delivering on the tone that we wanted from the characters, from the weapons, and that was in itself taking a creative risk. Making a very transparent shift was very visibly taking a risk and wondering, are players going to get what we're trying to do? And with Fuse in particular, it comes back to playing the game. We want people to not not look at it and make specific judgments about how the game plays. We want people to play it. Pick it up, check it out, check out the demo. So we are used to taking all sorts of risks, and they may not appear like risks to folks who are outside of the development process, but it's a constant tension within the company where we're trying things out and they just don't work. Or we've said, we're hanging our hat on this particular feature and holy crap, it's not fun. What are we going to do? And that makes the process pretty exciting, I guess.
The artistic style, it's interesting you bring that up because it seems like it's an underappreciated aspect of AAA because we talk about technical stuff, but I think like when you look at Borderlands and they shifted from pseudo-realistic to like this kind of cartoony style, and I think that got a lot of attention, a lot of fans that it wouldn't normally. Like how important was the visual design of Fuse to get across what this game is and try to sell it?
I think the most important aspect were coming up with the visual designs of the weapons, really. Figuring out what the mag shield truly did in the game and having a visual tone that reflected its impact, if that makes sense. I mean, it wasn't when we finally figured out what the weapons did well, like a shatter gun, for example, switching from the glue gun, which we showed off in the 2011 trailer, to what it is now, which is a much more aggressive, visceral weapon, what it did was not matching the tone we had in the game, both visually and just tonally, emotionally. So we started shifting the game to focus more, to really match what we were doing with the weapons and match the punch that we were creating for those weapons.
Okay.
But speaking of Borderlands, Randy might appreciate this, but we were at a Fuse panel at PAX and Randy was in the audience and somebody asked a very similar question, or actually stood up and said, you know what? I really like what you guys do, but I don't like the tone shift. I really don't like the game now that you have switched from Overstrike to Fuse. And Randy said, do you mind if I say something? He's back of the audience. He said, you know what? People said exactly the same thing about Borderlands before we released it. They said, you guys are nuts going from a realistic look to a cartoony look. You guys are going to fail. And his point was, people make these kind of judgments all the time, but you really got to play the game and see how everything fits together before you can honestly say, I don't like it. However, we're used to it. We put ourselves out there and people comment and we listen and we, in many cases, adjust based on what people say. And if you look at the game Fuse, how it's evolved, going from what we showed off in 2011 to what we showed off summer of last year to what the game is now, it's continued to go through changes. And actually the game is somewhere in the middle, I think, between Ratchet and Resistance in terms of its look and its tone. And that's a very comfortable place for us because it pulls in elements both thematically and gameplay-wise from both of those franchises. And for us, it's a very Insomniac place.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have shown your variety because Ratchet is almost like the definitive, looks like a Pixar movie game. Resistance is not. Resistance is very dark and foreboding.
Right.
So I guess the thing that's interesting about Resistance to me is it seems like there's training wheels almost. That it looked really good for the first two games, and the third game comes out and it was like, holy geez, I totally understand exactly what they're doing because the atmosphere was just perfect in that. And do you feeling like a similar learning curve now that the game is done? Do you feel like you fully realized what Fuse is, or do you think that it's like it's almost there but you haven't like fully realized it yet?
I think you can say that for every single franchise. I mean, even with Spyro, right? The first game is where you figure it out. You figure out what your world is, who your characters are, what your core mechanics are. And on the second game, you say, okay, it's fun, right? We got it. We figured it out. And I can say that honestly for Fuse. It is a really fun game. And I'm biased. I'm looking at you guys. I'm totally biased. But when we have people get their hands on it, they get it. They say, I get why this is fun and why this is an Insomniac game. Once we have that platform to build on, though, what's wonderful about being independent is we can take that in lots of different directions. And when you point out Resistance 3, that was an interesting journey for us because we made a lot of changes on Resistance 2. Like we took what was working on Resistance 1 and we asked ourselves, how can we change this up? We feel that there is this incredible pressure from gamers to continue to take it in new directions.
Yeah.
And maybe we weren't right about that. We took things really far and changed things up a lot, and we got some pretty serious backlash.
But yeah, there's mixed reactions to that.
Yeah, and so I mean, what was cool was the co-op was really appreciated.
Oh yeah,
you mentioned that before. The 8-player co-op was something we were really proud of, and and it got.
I've still never seen anything like that on consoles.
Yes.
Yes.
But that's what that's what the development process is all about. It's making decisions, trying things out. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But Fuse, just going back to that for a second, to answer your question more, I guess better. I really do feel like we have hit it on this one. It feels like a great game, and I'm happy and excited to look ahead and see where we can take it down the road. Because I think having a great base for a franchise is really important. And it all comes back to, is the game fun to play?
So, I mean, a lot of what goes into making games, I'm guessing, is, focus group and fan feedback and stuff. So if there is a mixed reaction to this, is there a chance it's going to go like the Prince of Persia series did, where from Sands of Time to Warrior Within, it was completely different tones? Or are you just like, no, this is our tone, and we're going to build on it like we did with Resistance, and we're going to make it stick with this?
Well, first of all, you mentioned focus groups. I want to set the record straight for a second. I've seen so many comments that say the tone shift was a result of a 12-year-old speaking up in a focus group at EA. No, that's not what happened. We made the choice to actually change the game, and again, as I said before, the weapons weren't working. We showed something off that we thought was visually really cool in 2011, but the punch wasn't there, and we knew that we had to get it right with the weapons.
Well, you didn't make that trailer from 2011. That was Blur Studios?
Blur. Like, yeah, it was a visualization of where we thought the game was going, but and that was, was
that an accurate representation of what you thought at the time it was going to look like, or was there kind of like mixed communication with that?
No, that was an accurate representation of what we thought would work. And what didn't change, really, I mean, we still have 2 girl characters, 2 guy characters, and they actually, while the trappings changed, Izzy's hair got a little shorter. She's wearing a leather jacket versus the long trench coat. She is a slightly darker character in terms of her background, but we never exposed her background in that video.
Oh, yeah.
Dalton has a slightly smaller chin, right? I mean, people watching this, I'm sure, will split hairs and say, oh, he's completely different. But the game actually didn't change that much at its core in terms of the overall story, what we were doing in the story, the settings. Definitely some of the paint on it changed. But when I say it didn't change the core, the weapons absolutely did change, because we had to get those right. And I mentioned this earlier on, but that jigsaw puzzle of trying to fit 4 cooperative weapons together that aren't your standard shooter fare it just takes a ton of experimentation and a ton of failure before you get it right. Okay,
so one of the things, I mean, I've never played the game, just that it seems like did change was the violence. Because it seemed like the original was kind of like...
Violence or vitals? Would you say?
The violence.
The violence, yeah.
Because it seemed like the original trailer we saw was kind of like, looked like Pixar. It looked like it was kind of The Incredibles. And then
people say that because of the glue gun. I mean, I brought that up before. Because of the glue, yeah. It was the gun that shot out expanding mirror-like balls that pinned the guy in place. And we actually had that working in the game. And so, yes, it was more of a passive restraint gun. It wasn't... and you think about that. Is it fun to actually freeze a guy and just leave him there frozen, or just have him fall over? Actually, it's not. At least not in terms of what we've been making. Yeah. There has to be that impact with weapons. And our vision for the game actually involved a more visceral deaths for the enemies. And we just weren't making that happen. It was just it wasn't there. Okay. And that's just part of the process of coming up with crazy weapons and feeling like it's all working together. Now, it's not just the weapon ideas themselves. There's a ton of details that go into it. Whether it's the sound the weapon makes, the recoil, certainly the enemy reactions, for sure. What they do in various situations if you don't hit them straight on. I mean, all of that is a big equation that you just constantly tweak until you get that, oh, yes, I want to fire this gun again, or I can't wait to play this with this character again feeling. Okay. And for us, that comes at different points in every project. Sometimes we get it at the beginning, sometimes we get it later, and with Fuse we get it later. Okay. Well, I guess the one thing that surprised me, having not played this, is I saw the ESRB ratings for this. I don't know if you've read your own ESRB ratings yet. But there was one line jumped out. It said, a handful of cutscenes depict more intense instances of violence, a character cutting an enemy's eye out as he screams in pain, a woman shooting a bound man in the head, a man exploding into chunks of flesh. Well, that happens all the time, by the way. Exploding into chunks of flesh. I mean, I'll just say, that's the mag shield does that. Yeah, so. Yeah. I mean, I guess the first one specifically, we're talking about like a cutscene where an eye is being removed. It sounds very violent.
And I mean, I wrote an editorial earlier this year that I really like when games use violence to further their message and their themes. Like Spec Ops: The Line, I thought it was extremely violent and there's a point for it. But then there's games like God of War, which I also love, which is kind of violence for the sake of violence, and then it kind of puts us in a bad light when the Congress is looking at us and politicians. Like, where do you think your game is with that? Is the violence just of the it's really fun to kill people variety, or is there more depth? Is there more message to what's going on the screen?
Absolutely. I mean, the cutscene you're referencing, the first cutscene you're referencing, is part of the backstory, and it's explaining how Dalton is connected to one of the called enemy factions in the game, and how he is directly related to one of the antagonists. Right, and doing things that he wasn't necessarily happy with, but forced to do them under the direction of this group that he eventually left and joined when he joined the other side. And so these, yes, you can call them out individually, and without context, yes, they will seem inappropriate perhaps. But in context, I mean, that's important that you take that into consideration. You need to play the game, watch the story, and learn about who these characters are, because those scenes help you understand the motivation for each of the characters. Now, speaking of motivations in general, the story is about what happens to humans when they get their hands on a lethal and volatile substance that they were never supposed to have. How do humans' motivations get twisted by something like Fuse? And you see every character in the game motivated or changed in some fashion by this volatile alien substance that you see from the very beginning of the game.
Okay, I mean, that sounds interesting. How do you think that message would resonate if it was like a T-rated game, for instance?
Well,
if you don't have the visceral, this is the damage that happens. Like, do you think you can still communicate that, or do you think it's necessary to have the M-rated violence, I guess?
Do I think it's necessary? We're telling a specific story, and this is the story that we came up with and we felt was going to work for gamers, especially for gamers who are of the appropriate age. And this game is for a mature audience.
Oh yeah.
And so there is violence in the game, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't think it's gratuitous violence. I think that it is absolutely connected to who the characters are, connected to their backgrounds, connected to the stakes that we establish in the game through what the antagonists are doing with Fuse. So,
okay.
I think it fits. And again, it's important to look at all forms of entertainment and realize that violence is something that is included in stories that are intended for mature audiences. And I'll just go off on this particular subject for a second.
Okay.
I'm really proud of our industry in that we do have a rating system that, as you pointed out, is explicit about what is in the games.
It's very explicitly details it for parents who are curious.
And that's awesome. I mean, the fact that I, as a parent, and I have a bunch of kids, I can be well informed about what I'm going to bring home and play either with or in front of my kids is fantastic, right? It's a tool that every parent should be using, and in fact, statistics demonstrate that parents are using it. People use our system more effectively than any other rating system.
Yeah.
And I mean, kudos again to the ESA and to the ESRB for being consistent with how games are rated and being very informative so that anybody understands what they're going to be getting in the game.
Yes, that's true. So the Supreme Court has ruled games are an art form, and they're protected under free speech. So that means creators can basically do what they want. And ESRB will label that, but they can do what they want. Do you think that as a whole, the industry is approaching mature topics such as sex and violence in a mature way, or do you think that there is a gratuitous nature to it at times?
There's so many different games, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I could try to stereotype. I'd say in general, the industry is very responsible.
Okay.
Right? And just like you could say that about the movie industry, or the TV industry, or books, for Christ's sake, right?
Yes.
So every single entertainment medium has an approach to these topics that are mature.
Yeah.
And if you single out individuals, you can always find cases where you could point to something and say, that was irresponsible, right?
Oh yeah.
But if you are forewarned that what is contained in this book, this album, this film, this game, this TV show is only appropriate for certain audiences, then again, you're forewarned. That judgment about what is responsible and what isn't responsible is, that's really kind of a trap. It's up to individuals, I think, to decide for themselves whether or not the games that they play and the games that they see promoted are handling these mature subjects appropriately. My opinion, again, to go back to that, is that we as an industry are responsible. Yes, there is violence in our games. Yes, we deal with sexual themes in our games. Yes, we have swearing in our games, right? But we generally do this for a purpose, to tell a specific story, to help characterize a person or a problem in a game, or to create a setting that has a flavor or a tone that enhances the story we're trying to tell.
Okay. I think games have been a lightning rod in large part because, aside from Nintendo, who clearly doesn't fit this category, the best-selling games are often really violent. So, Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed, they are...
Well, if you say Call of Duty, right? Call of Duty has pretty much outsold every franchise, right?
Yeah,
so if you take them out of the equation,
you take them
right?
out, and it's Assassin's Creed, and it's Skyrim, and it's usually there's a lot of M-rated games on the best-selling list.
But you take all games, right? I mean, take mobile games, for example,
mobile games
right?
is different, and indie games is different.
Put all games, and I'm sure some of your viewers will look at me and go, like, you're full of crap, right? But, when I look at the games industry today, and all the games that are available, the vast majority are not rated M, right?
Yeah, because there's like thousands of games, and probably 1%
even on consoles,
are M.
Even on consoles. You talk about the best-selling games, but when I talk about the number of games produced, there are a hell of a lot more games that are produced for E and T audiences than M.
Yeah, it just seems like the best-selling games, and I think that But
look at our audience. Our audience, the average age of players is over 30, right? So we are, in terms of consoles and PCs, we have a mature audience, and it kind of makes sense that a lot of the best-selling games are M.
Yeah, I guess it seems like when you look at movies, there are more games that are recognized. There are the violent games. There's the violent movies, Tarantino movies and stuff that are recognized, but there's also not violent ones. Whereas with games, for the AAA stuff, the only stuff that's really in the public conscious, if you don't play games, is stuff like Tomb Raider that's got a big ad campaign, and it's really good games generally, but they're also really violent games. And do you think that the industry
I'm going to bring up Ratchet and Clank. I'm just going to bring it up because you just pointed out to me before that one of your favorite games was A Crack in Time.
My favorite game of 2009.
Right. So, we've continued to make Ratchet and Clank games.
But do you think that the average person, Katie Couric just did this expose on games. She doesn't play games. Do you think the average person knows Ratchet and Clank, or do you think that they flock toward the Tomb Raider ads?
I think the average person knows Wii Sports, actually.
They do, yeah.
Right?
Nintendo's exempt.
I know you're using. Well, it's not. If you're talking about all console games, right? You have to include Nintendo.
Oh yeah.
And look at the numbers that Wii has done. If you look at general consciousness and general game playing, just sales overall, Wii Sports in particular and some of the Mario games have killed it. Right? So I think what you're doing is you're doing the Katie Couric right now. You're saying you are talking about M-rated games the way Katie does and making them a lightning rod. When I think we have to look at all games and the entire audience and understand that there are M-rated games that exist, and a lot of them, for a very specific audience. But there are also a ton of family-friendly games out there that are being consumed and enjoyed by people who perhaps don't want to play M-rated games or who want to play with their family. I'm sorry to accuse you being Katie Couric, but
I get that all the time.
Oh, you do?
No, I never get that.
Yeah.
So one of the things I find kind of ironic is there's a lot of mature games, as they're called, but then like mature topics such as religion, such as like BioShock Infinite was supposed to be about the xenophobic society, and it never really delved into racism at all. Like mature topics that could be upsetting are not really talked about in games. And why do you think that there isn't because gamers are older, as you said. Why isn't there more steps towards that? I mean, we really don't see much in the way of games trying to reach deeper into things that could possibly be upsetting.
I think you see a lot of that in indie games and smaller games.
You do see it in smaller games.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing right now is, I think, the rebirth of the indie. Independent developers, and we're one, have been around forever, right?
Yeah.
But today there are more opportunities for small teams to create create games that have a very different message, right? To really take some serious risks in terms of the types of story they tell and move away from what we would consider traditional core gameplay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Catherine was one that was a pretty interesting approach. And it's awesome that games like that exist, and I do believe we're going to see more and more of that as we move on to next-gen consoles. And as we have games that are, say a more direct path to the consumers through digital distribution, through just availability of all types of platforms for people. So the question, the answer may be that is coming. That those themes exist, and they exist perhaps not in as an overt form as you would like to see and as other players would like to see, but I think the dam is starting to break in terms of what is possible and what is considered a game and what isn't considered a game. Like this merging of very different types of themes and storytelling is occurring. It's making its way slowly towards, call it the AAA big console games.
Yeah, I think I would like to say that Heavy Rain was one of the most important games of the generation, because I think it did a lot of interesting things, and it also was a AAA game that was not AAA gameplay. I guess it was different, but it doesn't seem to have any impact in the industry, and there's nothing like Heavy Rain except we'll get Beyond, which is the same development team. Why do you think that more developers haven't tried to make something that can? Because one of the problems, like my wife doesn't play games. One of the problems is she's not going to play a shooter. Like she's not going to play like a 3D platformer. She's not going to play games like this. It's just kind of too complicated, I think. So why isn't there like a step to like, hey, anyone can play Heavy Rain? Why don't we make AAA games that anybody can play and have these deeper thematic elements, as opposed to just kind of doing the same type of you have to be raised on games to play?
I think any developer will tell you that having satisfying gameplay. Defining satisfying gameplay is challenging, right? I mean, you can have a slow-paced game that can be satisfying for some people, and you can have a high-action game that can be satisfying for some people. And the slow-paced games are going to have an easier time telling a deep, complex story than high-action games that need to keep things moving, because there's a certain audience who really does want to just jump in and just go for it. And story becomes more of a support for core gameplay. And I'm not going to take Fuse out of that particular equation, because Fuse is high action, and as I said earlier, we had to be really careful about overburdening players with too much story, simply because we wanted to make it an awesome and a fun co-op experience at its core. If we had taken Fuse and slowed it down and made it more of a puzzle game, where it's much more about considering things and reading lots of text that you pick up within the world, we could have done that too. We chose to go for the higher action quotient. So games exist obviously all over that spectrum, from the high action to the very, very slow, ponderous, thought-provoking games. Clearly, there is a large audience who gravitates towards the high action quotient games, right? And it's a challenge for us as developers to figure out how to weave story into those high action quotient experiences, right? Because again, the temptation is for us. I mean, we have a lot of people in the studio who would love to make 3 hours of cinematics, right? Totally. And a lot of fans out there would probably love to see 3 hours of cinematics and just really enjoy the story. And we got close to that with Ratchet and Clank: Crack in Time, right? There's a lot of cinematics in that game.
And they're really good cinematics too.
Yeah. But we, at some point during development, we have to make calls on where we think players will have the most enjoyment. So, again, I don't have a succinct answer for you, because it's a complicated question. And anybody, if people are watching and are saying, again, Ted, you're full of it, you don't know what you're talking about, I'd say try it. What's awesome about today is that if anybody wants to see a change in gaming, it doesn't have to be Insomniac that makes a change, or Activision, or 343. It can be you at home, making the next big thing for mobile or PSN or PC on Steam. That's what's awesome. And so I hope that what players do is, instead of, frankly, complaining about what exists in games, create. Right? I mean, that's why I got into the industry, because for me, the act of creating is so enjoyable. And we like to create certain types of games at Insomniac, but the fact that anybody can go out there now and change the world with what they create is really, really cool. It makes me It makes me want to be 21 again, and just starting over
Yeah.
and have all these tools at my fingertips and be able to make some pretty crazy stuff. And we continue to do that at Insomniac. We've chosen certain paths for the games that we have, but it doesn't mean that down the road we can't continue to change direction and try out different things. A lot of that's because of mobile. A lot of that's because the audience for games continues to expand and wants new stuff, right? Just like you're saying. People want to see new themes and games. And I think that maybe that's, I'm going off, aren't I?
No.
Maybe that's been consistent, but I haven't heard people be as vocal about this as I have over the last several years. And I think that in some ways is part of the hangover from having a very long console life cycle. People's thirst for something new, something fresh, different directions is greater than it ever has been before.
Yeah, I think for me, like the legacy of Portal 2 is that it's the only one I can think of offhand, but it's the rare AAA game that I think I could show to anyone and they'd be able to appreciate and actually play. Because it's not really violent and it doesn't require much dexterity and it's mostly puzzle solving and it's a great story. Like it kind of encompasses everything and it's still in the AAA game space. Like, do you think?
I'm going to bring up another platformer that I love, Little Big Planet. Right, Little Big Planet.
That's actually a great example.
Yeah, it's a game that I can show anybody as well and say, hey, and especially Little Big Planet 2. This has a really compelling story in it, but it's also got a lot of other really cool stuff and an awesome universe, and it's family friendly, and I can play with my friends. I mean, that's again, we were going for that same sort of, not the same exact thing, but the same sort of thing with All for One, which is a very family friendly game with a great story you can play with your friends. Those games exist in the AAA space, and I think again, going back to the Wii U and the Wii, they brought that. To a much different audience than the ones that you and I are generally speaking to, which is the hardcore audience.
Yeah, well I guess it's like, well, do you think there's going to be more of a push towards, in the AAA space, towards we need to expand the audience? Or do you think it's fine kind of like catering to the 200 million people who are already fans of AAA games?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, frankly. I think that when it comes to thinking about what we want as developers, and I say we at Insomniac, we want to create cool games, great games. I mean, that is at the heart of what we do, and that involves telling great stories. It involves making fans happy. I mean, more than anything, what really gets us up and going in the morning is are those instances where somebody comes up to you and says, oh, you work at Insomniac? You guys made Ratchet and Clank. I love that game. Or recently, hey, that Fuse demo, that rocked. And I know it's me kind of being a shill saying that, but we've been reading the comments from the Fuse demo, and after a long production period where we've been very visible about all the changes, it's really cool to see people getting their hands on one of our games and saying, I had a lot of fun playing with my friends. I mean, that's why we make games, so that people have those experiences. And it doesn't have to be, they don't have to come to us and say, you changed my life. And sometimes it happens, by the way. That has happened, and that's really cool. It can be as simple as, I had a lot of fun playing with my friends, my sister, my son, whatever, this weekend, and thank you. That's why we do what we do.
So looking at the last generation, I mean, you guys have released, oh my God, is it 5 Ratchet games and 3 Resistance games this generation?
So this generation?
Yeah.
4 Ratchet games?
I think
no,
it's
it's
5.
5. It's 5. Yes, it's 5. 5?
Because you had
Tools of
Destruction, Crack in Time, Quest for Booty, All for One, and the one I don't remember the name of.
Full Frontal Assault. So 5. Yes.
And then the 3 Resistance games. So you've released a lot of games.
Yes.
Like you're as prolific as just about any developer.
Outer Nuts. Don't forget Outer Nuts.
And Outer Nuts. Yes. What has shocked you about this generation that you totally didn't see coming when you were working on Tools of Destruction?
How long it would be? Frankly, I mean, we had no idea how long the console generation would be, and I got a lot of questions about Fuse in terms of. Well, the question was this: why didn't you guys make it for next gen? And the fact is, when we started working on Fuse, nobody had any idea when the next gen was going to arrive, and there were lots of rumors, and our intent was to build a new IP. Just to get it out there, because we had this idea for taking co-op in a new direction and doing something really cool with it, elevating it, and making it fun for 1 to 4 players, and doing, as I said, different stuff. So that, as things continued to stretch on, I know that all of us in the industry were looking at each other going, wow, this is really long. It's a good thing, and it's cool because the player base continued to expand, but clearly, as there were more and more sequels being released, players started to ask, so when am I going to get something new, right? And I think that actually helped a lot with the explosion of mobile and with the resurgence of PC and the popularity of Steam, right? I think that those have been some real benefits to having such a console lifecycle.
Yeah, I guess because you look at like Assassin's Creed sells 7 million copies, but it also didn't sell 197 million copies. You know, because there's a ton of people who own these systems, and maybe is the industry overvaluing how much people want sequels?
I don't know. That's a really hard question to answer because when you ask a player, the answer is I want something new, but I also love the franchises that I love, and I want more of them. So it's a sort of a dichotomy, right? You don't know. We know people want new stuff, and we know people love what we make as well when it comes to our franchises. So what do? Well, for us, we're fortunate to be in a position where we actually can make new IP, right? And so we've taken that jump and leapt off that cliff, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that people really like the new IP that we're building. Other companies don't, but a lot of other companies, you mentioned Assassin's Creed, Ubisoft makes a lot of games, right? They build a lot of franchises, and they're doing some really cool stuff with new franchises. So I don't think that any of us in the industry have said, it's got to be sequels. I mean, everybody is always thinking of the next IP and what they want to build next.
Okay.
And the other thing we think about is how can we take a sequel and change it in a way that feels fresh for consumers. And we've had to go through this with all of the games we've made, whether it was Spyro or Ratchet or Resistance, and ask, okay, we know what players expect from this franchise. How are we going to change it up, and how much do we change it up, right?
Yeah, that's the big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've taken some major risks. We totally changed it up with All for One on Ratchet. We totally changed it up again with Full Frontal Assault, and we were surprised by the response. And the response was, I don't get it. I thought this was a traditional Ratchet game, and we were saying, no, actually, this isn't a traditional Ratchet game, and we never said that. But that's that balancing act that you have to constantly perform. How far do you go to change a franchise, and how much do you keep of what you think players really want from that world?
Yeah, we saw that backlash, to bring up Rare again. Nuts and Bolts comes out, and it's actually awesome. I don't know if you've ever played it. It was not Banjo 3. And people were really angry about that. Like, as someone who, I mean, you make sequels, you've made tons of sequels. Like, how do you balance that?
You actually, I mean, so there's the emotional side and there's the practical side. The emotional side is, when we read negative comments about any of our games, it hurts.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, you have to develop a thick skin to be in this industry and to put yourself out there with your creations and have people comment on it. That's what we do, right? But it never gets easier reading those comments about whether it's Ratchet & Clank All for One. It's saying, oh, I really wanted something else. This game, I don't like this game. Or Fuse even, saying, making assumptions about what the game is. It's tough, but that's what it is to be a creator. You do put yourself out there, and you do take those creative risks. And it's easy to forget that, at least in my opinion, there's a silent majority out there who actually doesn't post on YouTube and doesn't get on the forums and post negative things. There are a lot of people out there who appreciate creativity and the opportunity to play something that does feel different and new. And we get a lot of fan letters from people who say, you know what, I'll just use All for One as an example. Loved All for One. Was looking for a Ratchet & Clank cooperative game that I could play with my kids.
Oh, yeah.
You guys delivered it. It was awesome. And those help offset I think it's the vocal minority who tend to be very negative about a lot of things and don't hesitate to tell you why you suck. Yes. Right?
Yes.
But we try to take that in stride, and we try to learn something from all sides, whether they're negative comments, positive comments, or suggestions for what we should do in the future.
So what are some negative comments? Because I mean, we'll talk about Resistance 2. It's a game we gave a 9 to. Like, it's definitely got some awesomeness, but it's one of your most mixed as far as reactions games.
Yeah.
What did you learn from Resistance 2 that you're like, okay, we can't do that? Like, the fans are totally right.
What we learned, we're going back to the practical again. What we learned were there were some core mechanic changes that we made that we didn't need to change. And the weapon wheel was a good example of that. So we brought the weapon wheel over from Ratchet into Resistance 1, and then we made the decision to go with the 2-weapon system in Resistance 2. And that was our attempt to do something different and to take to really change up the way combat worked to give players a fresh perspective. But what we didn't realize was that players wanted more of what we had brought them with the weapon choice and the combat strategy opportunities in Resistance 1. And we got some pretty harsh comments on that. The other was that we changed up the health system in Resistance 2. And that, of course, generated some negativity.
Well, it went from like pseudo-regenerating health where only in the first Resistance it was like you had 5 bars and only 1
and health pickups.
Bar would fill up and there's health pickups. That's how it went. And then was Resistance 2 just full regen?
Yep, full regen.
And then Resistance 3 went to...
Back to health pickups.
Okay.
So what we learned was sometimes you get it right the first time and you don't need to change for change's sake. And that was a good lesson for us. And so you saw us bringing back a lot of the core mechanics from Resistance 1 into Resistance 3, but then applying some of the, I'd say, storytelling lessons that we had learned along the way to Resistance 3, making it much more of a personal story, which we had heard from people was what they wanted from the game. I want to know more about your protagonist. Now
no spoilers.
Okay. We did something surprising at the end of Resistance 2, and that, of course, generated a lot of angst for people. I actually really liked that ending. For me, that was like, yes! I don't like endings that don't surprise you, but a lot of people do. Anyway, so we learned a lot from how we treated Hale in the first 2 games, and we wanted to make sure that players felt even more connected to Capelli in Resistance 3. So we brought in his family and really explored the interactions that he had with other people in the game. So that was useful even for Fuse, where it is about the characters in the game. It is this alien substance, but as I said before, you're learning about how this substance has an effect on everybody and what it does to them. So
yeah, it seems like you guys, because story's always been a big part of your game, but it seems like you've become much better of it, because I mean the early Ratchet games were enjoyable and funny, but there wasn't much gravitas to it. And then I play Crack in Time and I'm laughing, and then it's very emotional at the end. And it seems like you, as just a studio, you've really evolved with your storytelling. I mean, do you see that as the case yourself, and like how important is this going forward for you?
I do. I mean, I think that we're very interested in continuing to get better as storytellers. I think that it's when you play a game that is appropriate for a story, it just adds that extra dimension. There's some games that don't need story. Some games that just work well on their own with the core mechanics, and that's totally cool. I play a lot of those games. But when we choose to build a deep story into the game, for us it gives the world more meaning. It actually is more immersive for players. As I said before with Fuse, our challenge was not to overburden the game with story, and so I don't want to set improper expectations for this game. It's not Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time. It's a story about 4 characters and trying to give them all enough screen time so you understand who they are, but we're not making a 4-hour movie either.
Well, you said it also has like a dialogue within combat, right? So I mean, did you take any cues from previous games? Like Sands of Times did that really well, and then there's the narrator from Bastion. Is there anything that you're like, that does it great, we want to do that, or is this...
I think the first game that did it really well was Half-Life.
Oh yeah.
Half-Life had a fantastic approach to emergent dialogue, even though at times you're stuck in place and you can look around. No, actually, you're never stuck in place. You're stuck in rooms, basically. But I remember the first time I played that and thinking, wow, that's really cool. They're not stopping me for cinematics. They're actually allowing me to explore this world. And yes, you could do some pretty goofy things while story's going on around you. And yes, you might miss a lot of the story. And for us,
but that's your choice.
It is your choice
to play with the head crab. Well,
yeah. I think it's interesting from a design perspective. There are a lot of folks in the certainly even at Insomniac who wrestle with that problem of feeling like a player could miss an important part of the story if it takes place in real time. And so we've never gone the complete Half-Life 2 route where there are no cinematics in the game. Right, and I don't think there were any. There were some, but
were there?
At the very end, I thought there was. I guess maybe you were never truly forced to look at what was going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe there weren't. Right? So we've never gone that far, but we've continued to insert more and more emergent dialogue and story that takes place while you're playing. And I think that's something that we as a company are getting better at doing. We haven't mastered it by any means. And it helps with a game like Fuse, where you have 4 characters and potentially 4 players who all have, who want to do different things and are already trying to communicate with each other. And you got to figure out how to make story meaningful for them without becoming bombastic about it.
I think 2 games that did storytelling really well were Psychonauts and BioShock, in that they use the environment to tell a story, which is just like that thing you don't even really think about. It's usually like overt, like narrative. I mean, do you take any cues from that at all?
With our environments, I mean, what we absolutely are interested in varying things up from level to level. So Fuse is a linear game with some exploration within the levels, but you're pretty much on a big ride all the way to the climax. And what we didn't want to do was have one long desert or one long battlefield or something like that, where everything just feels the same. With all of our games, we've always tried to take you to various exotic locations along the way, so that the locations help you understand the context of the story. And every location you go to in Fuse helps explain, is deeply connected to the story that we're telling and what the antagonists in the game are doing. And there is a reason for the antagonists, say, holding up in these various locations that is relevant to Fuse and what they're doing with it.
That sounds pretty interesting. So you've been working on this for what, 2-3 years?
Yeah, for a while.
Have you just kind of pitched your fortunes to this for?
No, as I said, we work on a lot of different games. I mean, personally, I've been involved with the game, and I really have enjoyed it. I mean, the team, it's been a great team. We've been through a lot together. We've learned a lot. We've learned a hell of a lot more than we ever expected to about cooperative play. And I'm really proud about the features that we put in. And what it really comes through in terms of playing at the office with each other, and then going out to events and giving people who've never played the game a controller and saying, go for it, and watching them discover the various features and seeing them talk to each other, seeing people actually talk to each other and start to work on strategies as they're dealing with some of these very, very difficult combat setups. And this is not an easy game by any means, especially not Echelon, this competitive mode we have. And that's gratifying for us. So we are proud of what we've done. We're excited to see how it performs, and I hope you get a chance to play it too, because you clearly haven't played it yet. So.
One of the things that always scares me about the generation is there's like a new IP that comes out, something like Never Dead. I really enjoyed Never Dead. It was rough, but I enjoyed it, and of course it bombed because there's no advertising or anything. And then it's gone. There's not going to be a sequel to that. If Fuse underperforms slightly, like, worst case scenario, do you think you would still be able to go through and make sequels and build on it and say, no, this is totally awesome and you guys are totally going to get it if we release a sequel?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do. I mean, we make commitments to the IP we create. The only IP for which we have not created a sequel is Disruptor.
Yeah, I guess that's
our very first game. And to be frank, I don't even know exactly how many copies we sold. It's a terrible thing to say, but we never got royalty reports from Universal on that, because it was, you talk about a game that flew under the radar. That one was called the best game that nobody has ever heard of. I remember seeing that in a review for the game, now we were proud of that game, but there was a reason for us moving on from Disruptor, and that was that we actually did want to do something different. It was a great learning experience for us to figure out how to make games in the first place. None of us had ever made a game before, and so Disruptor was our very first one.
That's like a cult hit. That was your first game?
That was our first game.
That is impressive.
Well, it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, like every single game we've ever made has been. But with Fuse, I mean, I feel very confident about its core gameplay and what it does well, and we want to build on that. And I'm excited to build on that, but more excited to see what happens over the next few weeks. Because the next few weeks is demo and then game.
Yes.
Game coming out, and game coming out at an interesting time, right?
Yeah.
But for those, I mean, I'll just say, for those who want something different, for those who are dying for a new IP, dying for a great cooperative experience, Fuse has that. Fuse is the option. And I appreciate you having me here, because I can actually talk to a lot of folks and actually just say what I like about the game. And maybe your viewers won't like what I like, but I know there'll be a lot of things that people do like.
And you have the pedigree to back up, what anyone might see as a bold claim, because you've been around for like 20 years, right?
Almost 20 years, coming up on 20.
So I guess I'll ask you one more question. So if it's 2004 and you're working on Resistance Fall of Man, and you have and you can tell yourself like, hey, here's how the industry is going to go. You might not expect this. So what are you going to tell yourself in 2004?
Oh, back then?
Yeah.
I would say watch out for mobile, in a good way, because nobody saw that coming. I mean, obviously some very smart people did see it coming and did a great job taking advantage of it. But most of us in the console industry were so focused on thinking that the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 and the Wii to some degree were going to basically own the market. How could that change? We'd just been through 2 other console cycles that looked, smelt, and felt the same way,
yes.
right? And then boom, just everything exploded and changed. And I would say, I certainly would never have changed what we did on Resistance. I mean, being a launch title on the PlayStation 3 was a very exciting time for us. It allowed us to reach a lot of people that we normally wouldn't have reached. But I think most people in the console industry we're all looking around going, all right, things are very different. There are new audiences. This is kind of cool. And some people are going, holy shit, this is scary. But that's what it is what it is.
Yeah.
And we at Insomniac feel very fortunate to be in the position we are, which is still independent, still making new IP, still having the opportunity to experiment.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And,
Pleasure.
And Fuse comes out May 28th?
May 28th in the US.
Okay.
Yeah.